Nashville, North Carolina, Canada. Where in Canada, Elaine?
Well, I'm
Springfield.
currently in Edmonton, Alberta, but on the 31st, I'm moving to British Columbia. And can I tell a great story about conversations worth having?
Sure, while we're
Absolutely.
waiting. Yes,
Yeah, so
absolutely.
I finished my PhD 2 years ago, and I've only ever been able to get contract jobs, short-term contract jobs that pay really crappy and aren't helping me build a career. Well, I just accepted a position as executive director with a mental health association, which draws on all my research and everything. But what I did was, in the very serious interview process, instead of saying, what are the greatest problems that you're facing? I said, what are the greatest opportunities that exist? And so I had this with me.
How wonderful.
So that's my story.
Wonderful.
That's a great story to
Congratulations.
kick off.
Yeah, and congratulations on your new position.
It'll lift me out of a lifetime of poverty.
Ah, wonderful. What
Yeah,
a great way to start 2024.
absolutely. Now just tell my cat that. The trip
Uh,
is good. It's a good trip, kitty.
So let me just give a brief background that this Conversations Worth Having special is the result of a recent discussion that Jackie Stavros, Toni Benner, Michael Emmart, and I were having about the role that CWH can play in organizational generativity. And Toni and Michael started talking about how CWH had inspired generativity in their own professional and personal lives over the last 5 years. And their stories were encouraging, and their enthusiasm was just contagious. So Jackie and I thought it would be wonderful to invite others to listen to them and engage with them, and then for us to have a conversation as a perfect inspiration for everyone's journey of generativity into 2024. So over the next hour, we're going to start off with a conversation with Toni and Michael, and then we're going to open it up to hear from you, your stories and your questions about how CWH has or might fuel generativity in your life. First, let me do a quick introduction in case you haven't met Toni and Michael. Toni Benner is a thought leader in organizational transformation and human development. She has a diverse background in engineering, systems improvement, and executive coaching. She brings her expertise to leadership roles at Nexus with the University of Michigan, where she crafts experiential learning courses in leadership, lean, and change management, and as a director at the Fowler Center's Institute for Just Outcomes Through Conversation, where she advocates for social justice and public services. Her curiosity has led her into the depths of research as a doctoral candidate in organizational development and change, where she delves into the intricate world of co-design and innovation, exploring new frontiers and challenging the status quo. As a visionary leader, Toni blends theoretical knowledge with practical application, using her unique insights from various disciplines to inspire and guide others towards achieving excellence and equity in an ever-changing world. Thanks for being here, Toni. And Michael Emmart has a doctorate in education and is a certified CWH trainer living in central New York, where he and his bride raised their 6 wonderful children. He has spent his entire career working in or teaching about children and family services, and is an often sought out voice on using strength-based tools like appreciative inquiry and conversations worth having in the human services sector. He's a principal partner at the aptly named consulting firm Bright Path Strategies, and he's executive director at the Institute for Just Outcomes Through Conversation, which was formed to collaborate with and provide research to organizations and communities committed to actualizing social justice within public services systems. Michael is also a contributing author of the CWH focus book, Conversations Worth Having for Clinicians, Caseworkers, and Coaches. Thank you, Michael, for joining us. We are delighted that both of you are a part of this community and that you're willing to share your time and your experiences. So let's get started. Toni and Michael, your enthusiasm for CWH has been palpable from the beginning. Can you share with us a bit about how you came to this community, what sparked your passion, and how it has grown and evolved?
Should we flip a coin, Tony? And
I was gonna say heads or tails, Michael. What do we have? Do
go
you want
ahead.
to go ahead and kick us off?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Sure. So, I think I had come across the Conversations Worth Having book in 2018, probably soon after it came out. And because I think that was the published date. Yes, I'm seeing heads nod. So, yep. And to be honest, I was looking for a way to interact with Sherry and Jackie on social media somewhere. So I was looking to see if they were on Twitter or Facebook, which shows how old I am, right? Because I'm not talking about Instagram or anything else. And I found out that they were doing a seminar at Champlain College, and so I registered for the seminar, and I got to go spend a couple of days in beautiful Vermont, which is definitely worth the trip if no one's ever been there. And found that they were really open to discussing applying the learning from Conversations Worth Having in the world that I was working in at the time. I was consulting with the New York State Office of Children and Family Services on child welfare related issues. And I was really hoping is there a way we can use these skills in getting people to think about families differently instead of seeing them for all of their deficits, seeing them for their strengths, and instead of only worrying about managing risk, looking toward a future. And so little did I know the journey that we would be on over the 5 years, and the book that we would write, and the articles we would work on, and the collaborations that we would find in this community. So it's been really great.
All right, over to me then, Michael. That's closing. So I wanted to share my beginning of the journey started when I started studying with my master's of organizational development at Case Western Reserve. And so Professor Ron Fry introduced me and pointed out that there was going to be a conference in Montreal. I think it was 2017, actually. And it was the first time that I saw Jackie and Sherry in terms of doing a breakout session. And it was just amazing to think about learning and studying organizational development, specifically this emergent space, and thinking about the role that Conversations Worth Having was kind of playing. So my curiosity really kind of got me into this space. And then when I started to learn more about the appreciative inquiry and realizing that Conversations Worth Having, I think it makes it a little bit more application-based. What can we do to bring these practices in and kind of get things started? So instead of this bigger picture scale, trying to go, and I see some head nodding too, right? It's how do we kind of just break that down a little bit? And I think Conversations Worth Having, same thing, learned that there was going to be this boot camp and a certification in Vermont. It took a real fun trip through New York City to kind of get there and get primed, and had a really interesting. So when I think about the community also, and Michael and Jackie and Sherry, one of the things I'd like to highlight today too is what had happened when we arrived in Vermont. We were working on a whiteboard with Post-it notes and envisioning what could be and what the community could actually be. And so that whole part of just kind of really living the emergence of Conversations Worth Having. And since then, having the opportunity to collaborate with several members of the community, both in healthcare, education, nonprofit, how to help people in terms of, considering whether the certification is a good fit for them too. So a little bit of the journey of how myself, my lived experience kind of got introduced to Jackie and Sherry through the academic space, and then bringing it into practice.
Thank
I'll
you,
pause there.
Toni. Thank you, Michael. So you dived into how we met, and for those of you new to the community, so we met at this first boot camp, as they mentioned, at the David L. Cooper Writers Center for Appreciative Inquiry. And Toni and Michael were also the first set after we piloted certification. So they liked it so much, they came back to Vermont where we did the certification, and they were like our first to get certified. So you talked about how you sparked your interest. Could you talk a little bit about maybe one example from your work, or two or three, and even if you have any personal examples that you're comfortable sharing about what has emerged because you've learned so much about Conversations Worth Having and strategic conversations? So maybe you could share a little bit about that journey.
Oh, I'll let Toni go first this time, but I just want to say Toni beat me to certification by like 3 days, and I still haven't let it go.
Okay, I guess.
So Michael and I, we have this co-opetition, right? In terms of what's the next article, what's the next being thought leaders and partners, and just yes. So it was challenge was on. A great learning with that, right? So I guess if we lead into that, Michael, thank you for kind of bringing that to light in terms of the certification itself. Really invited me to think about, where am I putting this into practice? What might this look like in terms of the conversations worth practice? And the word that I would highlight over this entire hour that we're together, or there's actually two. One is integration and the other one is collaboration. What does that look like in the current work that I was doing to be able to get the certification and really turn it into action research, to journal and reflect on how these practices were making a difference in my classes that I teach in lean healthcare at the University of Michigan, in my consulting and what that looks like in higher education, all the way when we think about organizational development. But the one that really is important for me is how it dropped into my family. My nieces and nephews are just my superstars of my life, and they're scholar athletes. And one of the things that I just really enjoy is when they don't do well on the field, and yet when they're struggling, they're both superstars in their academic but to be able to name it, to really break that down to naming it in terms of what were your intentions, what does that look like? And so bringing these practices, I think, into my nieces and nephews where it started, and it gave me permission to bring it in terms of my own self-talk. What does that look like in terms of practicing for myself and things that I'm going through in terms of life and in my doctoral program? I'll share more of the organizational stuff a little bit later, but I think that's a note in terms of how to be a learner with these practices first, and doing it in a safe environment with my family.
Yeah, and I would
Maybe,
echo
Michael,
that.
you have.
Yeah, I'd echo that, Toni. In fact, when I talk to folks about conversation worth having skills, I often say you got practice it at home before you're practicing it in the boardroom. It's a lot safer in your home, and so my journey with the practices also started at home with my bride and our kids. And I started working in child welfare in 1997. Right, so that's a lot of years of working in a very stressful field that really, honestly, had left me very calloused and very, not always being the person I wanted to be. And I would say that Conversations Worth Having has changed the language of our home. It's changed the tone of our home, and it's really had a transformative impact, especially with my relationship with my bride. We've been married for about 30 years now, and so to see transformation after 30 years for anyone who's been married for a long time, it's not typical, right? Usually you settle into a groove after a number of decades, and so that's been the real significant gain. I then started using it, right? I got comfortable with it. I got comfortable with generative questions and positive framing, and feeling like it could be a little automatic, right? Moving maybe from amateur to novice, if you will, and started practicing it with the work that I was doing at the time in the child welfare space, and continue to do so, and continue to see it grow and have a really positive influence in the work that we're doing, particularly in the juvenile justice and child welfare space, where we're trying to bring power back to families, right, and maintain families together, which is something that always has been a touch point for me, especially this time of the year when we all get excited about seeing folks together. So, what else you got?
So, we started off, this came from our conversation. We've been researching and writing about generativity and what it means for people and organizations. What does generativity mean for each of you? What are some of the examples from personal, professional lives and your own, like, individual? How does it show up in your life, in your work? Why do we care about it?
So I'll kind of role play back when that question came up for us when we were collaborating, working on our Google Doc, right? This was really fascinating to think about, what does the word itself mean? What does the context that you give it in the scenarios? And I really appreciated our conversation the four of us were having in terms of, how do you define it? How do you recognize it? What does that look like? How do you put it into practice? And it all started with being able to define it. And I think that's where also Michael and I were like kind of tossing it back and forth. And then Jackie, Sherry were in it. We're kind of molding this definition and thinking about what does that look like? And so would this be a good time to kind of ask everyone in terms of what what their definition may be in the chat. What does generative mean for you?
That's a great place to
I'm gonna
start.
pause there for a minute and just kind of.
Yeah, what does generativity mean for those of you who are here?
Take a moment, think about it, put it in the chat for us.
And this might be the first time you've even thought of generativity as an organizational or personal life concept. What might it mean? So Jason says a positive way to progress a necessary conversation. Nice. Ah, Jan, yes, it has. Generative AI is all over the website.
Yeah, we're wrestling with that ourselves as we look to research the topic.
I love that intergenerational knowledge. And expanding your thinking beyond usual patterns of thinking, which may be stuck in the negative. Jan says, looking up and seeing more. I love that. Widening the scope of what's visible.
Yeah, one of the things that strikes for me as folks are still composing is that when we're often faced with a decision, folks, we can get a little anxious though. You got to make a decision. We got to choose, we got to choose A or B. We got to choose heads or tails, or we got to choose something, we have to choose a significant future of a family, with the folks that I'm often working with, and the effort to alleviate that anxiety and just make a decision already so that we can move on with our day. It can make us be quick to become intolerant of ambiguity. And for me, the idea of generativity is being comfortable in that ambiguity, right? Being not only okay with asking questions, but happy to do so, and almost reveling in that what used to be anxiousness and is now this understanding that, hey, something awesome is going to emerge here, right? I think Elaine talked about it in the story she told as we were waiting for folks to jump on. It shifts from, hey, what's your biggest worries to what's our greatest opportunity here to make something fantastic happen. And I think that's the really exciting thing for with regard to generativity for me.
I think I was approaching it also from a social technical lens. And so for me, I'm coming from being hardwired in the engineering world, and my engineering background is that everything has to be quantitative. Everything has to be a number and then advance to a new number, these SMART goals, all of this space, and thinking about as problem solvers, asking these questions of why, of what happened in the rearview mirror. So the emergent piece for me in my thinking is being able to put my engineering kind of in the parking lot for a moment and really think about generative questions in a way that it helps advance or widen the view or connect in a different way that's more qualitative. So what I mean by that is even the semantics. Like I will stop and pause in the moment now and think about, what does that look like in terms of my vantage point of the horizon? How do I look a little farther? What does that look like to look a little bit wider, and really bringing that into practice in the relationships that I'm in? So again, it's been a huge practice for me to kind of let go of the technical space and think about, what does that mean to be in a relationship with myself and relationship with others? And that's that 5 dimensions of what's out there on the horizon, widen the view, what's going on in my community, to the people to my left and to my right. What does that look like in terms of honoring the work that's happened before in the past? And I think that's the spirit of generativity, of being rooted into Mother Earth, and then also getting a little bit taller and connecting to my faith, whatever that looks like. So it really brings in this holistic view for me, and this definition allows me to kind of play in the space a little bit differently than just trying to fix something or resolve something, but really looking for holding space as emergent ideas, connections
Toni,
first.
I didn't want to interrupt you. Could you say those 5 dimensions again? You talked about being in those 5 dimensions. I thought I heard these
So
dimensions.
being in the 5 dimensions, yeah, I guess I'll invite everyone to do it with me. Is it okay if we kind of turn it into a little bit of my first breath is being able to just take a moment and kind of breathe in and think about your attention looking out on the horizon, whatever it is that you see out on the horizon. What could you do to just, in the next breath, see a little bit further? Right? What does that look like to widen your view on that horizon? Is it narrow or is it wide? So just being present in the moment and thinking about The next breath, what's going on to my right and to my left? Those dimensions of the people to my right, the people to my left, being in connection. What does that mean in terms of leaning back, feeling the clothes on my shoulders, on my back, and thinking about the people in my past, generational? What does that look like in terms of being really present in the moment and thinking about the dimension of being rooted into Mother Earth in the now, and being lifted and feeling a little bit taller and being connected with my faith or the universe, whatever you want to plug in for you. That's
for
for me, the
taking me on.
generativity is being able to see that holistically.
Thank you.
It's very relational. And what I hear in that is that it is not this thing you do by yourself. It is this thing you do in relationship with everything that's around you, including past and future. Can you both talk a little bit more about what does relational have to do with generativity? I think that's just an important thing that just emerged for me.
Yeah, Sherry, one thing I would say, I think it's a both and. I think it starts with yourself. I can remember sitting in that first workshop and y'all had an image of the screen of fish, and you said, what percentage of your waking hours do you spend in conversation? And I was thinking, I don't know, like 50% of the time I'm talking to someone else. And then the hit, of course, was that you spend 100% of your waking hours in conversation, because if I'm not talking with Toni and Jackie and Sherry and Elaine, I'm talking to myself, right? And the skills to be generative with myself, to have grace with myself, to use positive framing with myself, to ask myself generative questions instead of being harsh with myself, that has sprung forth a lot of health and wellness, right? For especially, again, as a guy who's spent his career, with uncomfortable and often chaotic and traumatizing events, right? So I would start there, and then of course, then it grows outward, right? As I have as I put my own oxygen mask on, so to speak, now I can reach over and I can be with those that are nearest to me, and then maybe I can even build beyond that. And I don't know if you've seen the same thing, Toni.
Yeah. It's interesting. One of the examples that I would talk about is a lot of the work that I do in the operating room. And so in the very beginning, coming from an engineer, moving into healthcare, is I went and studied the operating room, and I watched all these dynamics play out, and I watched things that were coming in and what did that look like as a process and what went out. And so when I went over and started sketching like a new blueprint in terms of, wow, this would be much more effective and efficient if we actually did these steps in a different order. So I go back into the operating room team and I'm like, okay, here's the blueprint. Can we try this experiment to kind of do things in a different sequence? And they kind of looked at me and they're like, why don't you head back to Ann Arbor? Because I'm not sure what you're coming in and rearranging the process. But what I'm sharing for me is conversations worth having has also helped me really see about the people in the formula of change. It helps me see something that I've been missing in the way that I've been studying and in the relationships, Michael, that you were just mentioning, right? We've talked about this over and over in terms of how do I go in and understand the teams that I'm working with first? How do I create an environment where they can name even in the inefficiencies or name some of the social issues that they're having in terms of psychological safety or not? And I think that relationship, I think where you're going, Sherry, is how do we do the yes and, but how do we lead with people first? What does that look like to really understand and be in relationship both with the scenarios and with the people? So that's what I'd add to that, Michael.
Can I just ask a question there? Then it sounds like generativity is about change. No? I don't know. Is there an element of generativity that's about change?
Can we open that up to everyone in terms of what elements do you think would fit in there? I'm sorry, Michael, go ahead.
Well, I think it's opening it up to folks is a good idea. I also think that generativity is about creating an environment, and I think change is a possibility, right? And almost an inevitability in our environment. So even if we may not think of it as generativity is about change, we're going to confront change. So generativity is about how can I make myself prepared and open and welcoming, and even maybe I become an early adopter to change because of the fact that I've cultivated this skill or this process, as someone said earlier.
So,
Before we move on, can I ask a question?
absolutely.
There's a couple things I was taking from Toni and Michael, your conversation and sharing with us is that conversations worth having sounds decolonial, and it also honors the voices, wisdom, and lived experience of people with lived experience. So rather than weaponizing, you hire somebody because they have lived experience of homelessness, and then you weaponize that very lived experience against them. And conversations worth having, seeing from what you're saying, seems to be a place where we honor those knowledge systems that aren't the dominant knowledge systems. That's what I'm hearing. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think that's a fair. It's about having an openness to possibilities, and so when we talk about, I don't work too much in the realm of homelessness, but I work a lot in the area where lived experience is really key, and a lot of times you see, if you think about a continuum, right, where if we're engaging folks who have lived experience in a particular area, maybe where we might see it as a particular challenge to them, we can in one way be really, placating and just, hey, what do you think, and really not listening, right? And if we invite people into spaces and then we really don't listen to them, we get back to that relationship piece, right? Where my ability to leverage your strengths as part of making us a greater whole becomes really limited. And so, some of the work that I'm using conversation worth having in right now is in bringing together a couple of hundred folks from throughout a community and saying, hey, how do we take power back from the system and instead empower the community to do work and to help children and families to cultivate that village that it takes to raise a child that we all know about. And a big piece of that is the listening and the helping systems to listen to communities in ways that they don't typically do. So yeah, I wouldn't disagree at all. That was a really long way to say yes, you're right.
So maybe we could at this point, two things is I think I'm going to move to so we can see everybody and take a moment and perhaps type into the chat. You heard Toni and Michael, and if you could type into the chat, what are you seeing as the key factors or the most important elements that facilitate generativity? So maybe we could type that into the chat. And Toni and Michael, maybe you can speak to what you're saying and we are hearing about key factors or the elements. And I'm going to turn off the spotlight so we could then transition into a nice conversation on this.
While folks are typing, I just want to say how much I appreciate all of the terminology you use in collaboration and creativity and process and progress. And I mean, it's all of that, right? It's all of that as we look to capture a definition of some sort.
There's some stuff going into the chat. Maybe Toni and Michael, you could first speak to about what you're seeing, what they're hearing from your examples as the most important elements that facilitate generativity. And then I'd love to open it to just observations and questions from those that joined us today.
I'll share one around the factors. I just recently, about a month ago, worked with the procurement team in higher education, and they're all change agents and program managers. And one of the things that was fascinating in day one is being able to, one, name whatever their role was, their perspective. And it was fascinating to see what ended up playing out in terms of bringing in generative questions and looking at the yes and to technology and how do we overlay that on terms of the impact that's going to have on people. what's that going to look like in terms of the programmers? What's that going to look like as the users? What's that going to look like? So at a higher level, I'm just using that example to think about what factors happened. And it was about creating a container. It was about creating conversations and being able to write them down so that they were explicit. It was just also this way of being able to listen and think about all of these factors that created possibilities of what could be in the future. And so it really, I think, also lands in a lot of the change management equations and theories that Conversations Worth Having, I think, is kind of weaved into. But I'll pause there. Michael, do you want to add to that? Or?
Well, as I look through what folks are writing, and Jason wrote about divergent possibilities, and I'm a firm believer in every conversation changes the course of our reality, right? So for those of you who are here today, you might pick something up in the conversations that we're having all together, and that creates a new future that wouldn't have existed if you weren't here. I don't mean to get too cosmic or foofy, but I think it's a reality, and a quick story. So I had a caseworker come to me once, and she was working for the county, and she called me. She said, "Hey, I got a parent where we got 2 teenagers in the home. We're trying to keep the kids there, but she's got a lot of mental health problems. And every time I walk into her house, she's throwing staplers or, anything that's near her. And I telling her, I can't keep working with you if you're assaulting me." And so I said to her, I said, "Wow, yeah, I mean, you don't want to have things thrown at you. That's not fun. What do you think's causing her to throw stuff at you?" And she said, "Well, she must feel really unsafe," which was very insightful by the caseworker, right? She must be really unsafe, and that's why she's defending herself. I said, "Well, I think that's great. Have you talked to her about what it means for her to feel safe?" And she said, "No, I haven't. I usually just go in and we talk about the boys and the fact that they're not going to school and that they're smoking marijuana and they're breaking the window in the neighbor's house." And so, wow, that those feel like really unsafe conversations. I said, "What about if we just had a conversation with her about what it means to feel safe?" And that conversation created a relationship between this caseworker and this mom that kept those 2 boys in their home with their mom. And that's one of those divergent possibility type conversations, right? Well, hey, what does it mean for you to feel safe when I'm with you? Right? One of those conversations that maybe we should have when we're doing DEI work, when we're doing work with folks who have been served by some or are serviced because of some disadvantage. I have a friend of mine who says that services for the poor often become poor services, right? And how do we look at someone and say, "Hey, what does it mean for you to feel safe as we're all working together here?" That's a really important divergent conversation. So that's what sprung up for me as I was looking through, and I appreciate so many folks sharing so openly here. This is a great chat window if you're not paying attention to it.
Yeah, I was just going to highlight Carrie's mention around the, maybe we can talk about a little bit, when does the access to higher ways of knowing and listening to that, that whole access to higher ways of knowing, there's that in itself. I'm just kind of pausing and holding it and thinking about it myself in terms of what does that look and feel like, and maybe some examples of that. I don't know if Carrie, you happen to have any more that you would add to that. That's amazing. That's just profound.
I just found it interesting that when you were saying that, it was like being in a guided meditation and actually did open up that space, that shifting that you were doing.
Thank you for sharing.
I was going to comment on that also, because it's what struck me about that and its connection to what you were talking about. It's that's, again, I'm linking back to staying in the anxiety or the ambiguity and listening for that thing that wants to emerge through your intuition, through your heart, through some other way besides, "I thought it, and now I'm going to make it happen." It's that opening up to other ways of knowing, which strikes me as being like inherently generative, because it's not generating out of something in the past, but something that's coming through. Do either of you have
As you're saying that,
Go ahead. Sorry.
What's coming forward for me right now is actually, how we use the video and we use this phrase above and below the line. right? And to me, the above and below the line, sometimes at that surface level is very much a polarity. It's either negative or positive. And for me, the way that I use above and below the line is actually here in my body. Am I
Nice.
above in my head? What can I do to like open up and have this meditation and think about how can I come from my heart and my gut in addition? And I think that what that happens is, to me, in the traditional above and below the line that we use, is that now we're playing in that gray zone, that it's not really above or below. It really is this space of thinking about, how am I thinking about it? How am I feeling about it? How am I in relationship with other? I like to widen that band of that line and think about the conditions and the situations, scenarios that play out in that space before you even flip it. It's like, okay. And that I'm sorry, ways of knowing kind of took me there in terms of above and below the line.
Yeah, I've often felt really similarly, Tony. It's almost like living in 4D, right? It's this, can I have an awareness of, you know, some pseudo out of body experience? Can I just stop myself for a minute, kind of figure out where I am, right? That kind of, detach from the moment for a minute, for those, friends with the military background, right? That's an important part of, let me detach, let me kind of look from above and see, where am I positioned? And then am I in a healthy place? And Sherry talks a lot about, hey, am I hydrated even? When was the last time I ate something? Even little things like that, but then it scaffolds from there, right?
So this would be a great time to ask those of you who came to spend this hour with us, what observations, questions, comments do you have for the whole, or for Toni and Michael?
Or more stories to share of generativity. Yeah.
Well, I certainly have something, and I'm so grateful to be here with all of you. I appreciate it very, very much. Michael, I wanted to just speak to something that you said. And, one of the things I found, I have clients that I work with, homeless individuals, and I keep them stably housed. And they're elders, so they come with their own sets of challenges and things that we have to face every day together. And one of the things that really has been so impactful was something that you just mentioned. Is simply asking questions, to me, is generative, right? Because it opens up that space for them, and they look at you like, wow, you just asked me a question, and I'm going to answer you, and we're going to have this dialogue, and we're going to, and that's how I create rapport with these people who are sometimes not used to having someone ask questions and listen to what they're saying. So I appreciate you bringing that up, and just wanted to add to that. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate you noticing that. And, if we think about our human service systems, we ask people questions that maybe sometimes we already know the answers to, or they're these frivolous questions. But how often do we really ask future-oriented questions of folks? And think about how humanizing that is for them to be asked a question about something interesting, right? That we can take time and we can see them and hear them. I think that's so important.
I just want to jump in for a second. Sorry, when I have really bad anxiety, I talk too much. But Michael, just to reinforce what you talked about, is in my work, it's all with students from poverty trying to go to school to escape poverty. That's not what happens. But all of them said, nobody ever listened to me before. And how amazing it is if interview questions for research were from a conversations worth having perspective. And I'm really new to this, so but
You're doing fine. You're doing great.
But it would be, and just thinking about how transformative it could be, that if the questions weren't to just benefit the researcher, but perhaps if those questions and conversations actually honored the very lives of people with lived experience, so it wasn't extractive and it wasn't colonial and icky, that it was like, no, I actually really, really do want to hear what it's like to be a single mom in poverty, trying to keep a roof over your head.
Well, and I think it's also bigger than that too, because it's what is it like to be you? Because you are so much more than a single mom in poverty, right? You're so much more than that one thing that we might define you by because of this interaction. And that works for everyone on this call, even if you're someone who's never even tasted a moment of poverty, right? You're so much more than the single role that you might be playing and the interaction that we might be having, whether I'm interacting with you as college professor or executive director of this or my coworker. And that's that relational piece that I think Sherry was trying to pull out of us, a little earlier, right? Is that really seeing each other and spending time to make those investments. And having spent a number of years as a professor and with a lot of students who were from very disadvantaged homes, and served by very underperforming schools, just, hey, I'm not talking to you about our course. I'm not talking about the paper we have to write. Let's just talk to you about your life. Oh.
So just quickly, have folks heard of Adichie? And I'm sorry, I don't know how to say their entire name, but I do believe they're an American now. And you can go online and listen to it for free. But she talks about the danger of a single story. And you just reminded me to how careful I need to be about the language I'm using, particularly as I'm going into my new role as well. But that you're right. It's not just the single mom in poverty. If that's a single story and a damaging story. Mm-hmm. So thank you.
If I could add on that, I think one of the deep practices is actually the asking questions. What do I mean by that is use of self. If we think about how is it that we're present and how am I asking the question, the tone that I use, the words that I use in terms of words create worlds, the scenarios, and really feeling confident and curious in our intention of us as humans asking the question. Like we represent what as that question kind of rolls off into the space and conversation. And I think that comes with a little bit of a caution, I guess. Are we really asking the question, or is it really a statement that's kind of just, pretends to have a question mark at the end, but really it's something that's kind of leading as opposed to really being present and being curious and thinking about the intention of asking that question. So I'm just kind of building on the story and how do we create the conditions for that story to unfold. I think we're responsible in terms of owning that question in a way that's collaborative, it's safe, it's not pointed. I think that is in itself brings us back to that spirit of generativity. What can I do, borrowing from improv, to think about the yes and in this moment? And it just made me think about the people part.
Yeah, and if you think about it, Toni, culturally, whether here in the US or in Canada or wherever, anywhere I've traveled anyway, that we're not as encouraged to ask questions as we perhaps should be, right? Everyone's probably seen the research. A 3-year-old asks, I believe it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 million questions a day. And if you've ever had a 3-year-old, that is what it feels like. And then by the time you're in adolescence, you ask 3 questions a day, and how to, it's a different scale. Obviously, I mean to be a little facetious, but how can we cultivate a spirit of curiosity because of how important curiosity is to generativity? And then a conversation we've been having on our team is how do we get more men to come into this space to have a comfort level with, the importance of conversations and the importance of asking questions and the importance of utilizing these skills so that we can be more generative and appreciative in our interactions with our children, with our partners, in the workplace, in our communities, especially when you look at really, male-dominated society, elements of society like policing, like the military. There are places where questions and conversations aren't as strong as they should be for us to be able to have the society that we want. And a lot of that is because of the way that we socialize folks. Yeah.
Yeah. Someone I knew started at dinner time. He said, at breakfast, he said, tonight at dinner, we're going to have a conversation and I'm going to ask everybody, what was the best, most productive question you asked today? And in the beginning, he said that, you know, that you're like, I don't think I asked any questions, but over time, because he kept asking it and kept telling him in the morning, remember, and he said they started asking a whole lot more questions, and then that fed itself. It became its own positive feedback loop, and he said it opened up great conversations at dinner.
And I will tell you, I have children as young as 9 and 11, and a child as old as 28 who's about to have her own child. And the value of conversation in that span is remarkable, and the value of conversations worth having in the relationships across that span has been remarkable. Especially considering how damaged those relationships were when I started this journey 5 years ago, right? That's the important part that I always keep a mindful of, is that I was not coming from this great, healthy place. And, you know, I was not a social worker or a yogi or, you know, and so I'm really grateful for these. We talked about these 5 years of generativity. Wow, what an impact! What an impact it's had.
Does anybody else like anything they'd like to share or ask of the group?
Or any stories you have of generativity.
I'll share something about an experience I just finished in a co-housing facilitation course. And Charles Durrett, who's kind of the guy in that world, was talking about if a community doesn't spend a minimum of 10 weeks of facilitated conversation, that 80 to 90% of those communities fail, because this glue doesn't ever get established. And it was just, you know, who was it? I mean, somebody was talking about elders. It's really meaningful.
Well, that's powerful in terms of organizations as well, and families. How much time do we actually spend in meaningful conversation versus, you know, addressing the to-do list or moving towards achieving organizational goals?
Thank you, Carrie. So as we come up on our hour, perhaps you could just reflect back on the last hour, 45 minutes we've been together. If you could think, what have you learned or heard that really resonates with you or inspires you? And maybe we could put that in the chat, especially to leave it as a gift to all of those that came today and spent their time with us. But, you know, what have you heard or learned from what you've heard that really resonates with you or inspires you for what's going to be next? And if you could share that in the chat with us. And if you don't like typing in the chat, you can unmute yourself.
I've always thought that Zoom needs, you know, when you text someone, you can see them texting back. And so you see the little that someone's texting. You need that for Zoom. Are they typing? Are they not typing? Do I hold space a little longer? Do I start talking now?
What a great idea.
Yeah, and I also, you know, and good thing I don't sing, but always giving the space and the silence a little bit for you to think about, you know, again, what did you hear that you're like, aha, or the conversations I have with myself are negative and need to be reframed.
Bring up that someone said grace earlier, have to have grace with
Grace
ourselves.
and space, yes. I feel refreshed. Good to see you, Jan. Reminded of the power of appreciative inquiry and conversations worth having. Feel good that I can recognize the fact I'm using the elements of CWH in my classroom. And you're right. And your students, they'll love it. Just the way, no matter what you're teaching. So thank you, Jan.
I just think it's been really interesting to hear kind of, I think many people have alluded to the undertones of how our systems favor stagnation as opposed to generativity. So kind of going beyond this idea of positivity, but more, I think, in the space of the challenges of being divergent, right? That in itself is, unfortunately, I don't think intuitive to us anymore. And I think I've just heard an invitation too of also not necessarily judging our questions, but just being willing to ask them.
Yeah,
Thank you, Elizabeth.
the status quo is so safe, right, Elizabeth? It's really safe to just sit where we are because I can just blame someone else for something's wrong, and I can enjoy if everything's are going well, and to live with that anxiety of, hey, let's make a move. Let's try to grow. Let's try to, it can be really uncomfortable.
Elizabeth, it also reminds me of is it our mindset that moves us to want to stay in the status quo or stay stagnant? That the mindset that says if we could just get it right, then we could coast, as opposed to, we're all a living system, interconnected, and coasting and getting it right that's not even the right question. It's that, and that, if we shifted the mindset, and is generativity part of that shift in mindset towards what brings life, what gives life, what keeps us evolving? I just wonder whether or not that would do something to shift how hard it is for people to step into change and welcome it or embrace it.
Yeah, I mean, can I build on that a little bit?
Yeah,
So,
please.
yeah, I think that's really fascinating to think about, and to think about the kind of humans in the context of systems, and we're all our own individual systems, larger systems. Beyond that, just the capacity that we have actually, right? So I think what you're talking about a little bit is the shift from like, what's the matter to what matters to you.
Oh, nice.
Right. But then it's the acknowledgement that there's 14 people on this call, and what matters to me is likely not the same as what matters to anyone here. So there's then beyond that a huge shift of how do we actually come together and accept the work of collaboration, I guess.
Yes. Yeah, which goes all the way back to what people said at the beginning, that part of generativity is collaboration. I love that Jason said stagnation is boring.
Hear, hear.
Yes.
Keeping it moving. Yeah, I think that would be great to play with, to think about even the role of mindset in generativity, just even focusing and thinking about one of the practices where we say, name it, flip it, reframe it. What if it's just name your mindset, name it in the moment? What does that look like to honor? What other mindset might we have? I mean, to really talk about really getting narrow when we think about mindsets and generativity, I just kind of journaled that myself in terms of a takeaway.
Oh yes, the Anatomy of Peace. I can't think of the team that wrote that. Albringer Institute. They wrote 3 really good books, Natalie, and I think the first one was the Anatomy of Peace.
Yes, yes. I didn't know how to say the name, but Albringer.
I call him Albringer.
Albringer, yeah.
Albringer, yes.
It's it's a good read.
Yes.
Or listen on Audible.
Yes.
But reading is better because there are some visuals, some charts and things kind of drawn out, but really good companion information to conversations worth having.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and they also wrote something about self-deception of leadership and the outward mindset after the anatomy of peace. Well, we're coming up on the hour. Is there anything, Toni or Michael, that you want to share before we just close out? And so appreciative of your time. This happened in like at the last minute. We're like, we can't keep this conversation to ourselves. And Toni and Michael agreed to do this on short notice.
Well, I'll just say real quick, thanks for coming and listening and contributing so much. Again, it has been a joy. I think I got myself lost in the chat once or twice. It's just been a joy to see your reflections. I just want to Jan had said that I don't see stagnation as safe, and I said, wow, I wish that more people agreed with that. And I really think that, especially in the time that we're living in now, we've got to recognize that the safe thing is progress, right? The safe thing is moving us and our society and our cultures and moving that forward. And so thanks for having the conversation with us.
Yeah. Thanks for Jackie and Sherry of continuing the conversation, and Michael always being a thinking partner in terms of what this might look like, and now all of us joining, right? I want to just close with thanking Jason also for putting in the chat in terms of something that was a takeaway, and it represents co-design and participatory design. And I think that's just what happened over the last 45 minutes, is that we all get to play, share, express, and contribute to the topic at hand in terms of whatever that may be, in terms of emergent and your takeaways. So thank you everyone for joining at this last minute and the collaboration.
Yeah. Thank you all so much. And we will post this to our YouTube channel, so it'll be there. So thank you. Have a wonderful holiday season, and may your 2024 be positively generative.
Indeed.
In all the entendres.
All right.
Wishing you a great start to your week.
Yeah.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.